Hello, BookTube. I need a bit of a break. Periodically throughout the day, I need a bit of a break from the work that I have got mountainously piled on top of me, so I thought we would talk about Tudor fiction for a bit. I floated the idea the other day of doing a buddy read of this book, Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel, the second installment in her trilogy of books about Thomas Cromwell, the famous lawyer and henchman of Henry VIII. I've already done a buddy read or a read along of this book in multiple parts on this channel a couple of years ago, I think it was. But it's such a good book that there's no harm in doing another one. I thought. I don't know how much. I floated the idea and got a lot of agreement from a lot of you who would like to do this, who would like to go through this. It is entirely possible to read this thing independently of either Wolf Hall on one end or The Mirror and the Light on the other end. You'll get a lot more if you don't. You'll get a lot more if you read them all closely, because boy, oh boy, does Hilary Mantel make them one tapestry of a book. It is possible to read this just by itself, but her characters are constantly echoing things that they've said, first in one earlier book and then in two earlier books. Very satisfying for a reader who is not only reading all three, but paying attention along the way. But you don't need to do that. This is a famous story, probably the most famous story of any of the three books. This is the story of Anne Boleyn, who, through enchanting King Henry and seducing him and suborning him and teasing him and withholding from him, drives him mad with a combination of yearning for a son and lust, that she actually drives him to put aside his rightful wife, Queen Catherine of Aragon, in order to marry her. This is a story that was made famous by Philippa Gregory in her much earlier book, The Other Boleyn Girl, because before Henry did that to Anne Boleyn, he did it to Anne Boleyn's sister and just took her for a mistress. And as characters say all throughout these three books, once Henry tires of a mistress, he is gentle and friendly to them. He's good with his exes, as one reader said to me, but he discards them. They don't have any hold over him anymore. And Anne Boleyn knew that, and so she held out for promises, substantial promises, including the highest promise of them all, which is to make her his queen. And one of the ways that she got him to do that, it wasn't just lust. It was also that Henry had been married to Catherine of Aragon for the better part of 2 decades. And every child, barring one, he had a daughter, Mary, with Catherine, who lived. And was sickly, but lived. But every other child, male or female, was born dead or died soon. A procession of little dead bodies that would make anyone who had Henry's weird, mystical Catholicism think that he was cursed. And Henry wasn't getting any younger and knew that he wanted to provide England with a legitimate male heir. And Anne was promising that. She promised something that no woman can promise. And Henry knew that. She promised him heirs, men, boys. And he believed her and installed her as queen. Started an entire break with the church over it in order to become the master of his own marital destiny, I guess you could say. And when this book opens in 1535, when Anne has now been queen, and she has provided Henry with a child, but a daughter, Elizabeth. The first child, the longed-for son, doesn't happen. Instead, it's a girl. Now, no one in this story has any idea that Mary will rule and become infamous as Bloody Mary, and that Elizabeth will rule and be widely regarded not only as the greatest Tudor monarch, but was one of the greatest monarchs ever in English history. No one has any idea that any of that will happen. Ironically enough, I think probably the character in these books, in this book and the last one, who has the strongest idea that that is possible, is poor put-aside Catherine of Aragon, whose mother ruled in her own right. So she knows it's possible. But in England, no. So Anne's position on the throne is not quite as sunny as it was just a couple of years ago. In 1535, she's not as young as she used to be, first of all, and that's true for Henry as well, but who's going to tell Henry that? And also, she's only provided him with a daughter, and has not got pregnant again that he knows of. And that's where we find her in this story, and that's where we find Henry, an older man. He can't even pretend to be the glorious, athletic, unbeatable, gigantic young monarch that he once was. And in 1535, we find Cromwell, who is an intimate counselor to Henry and is in the process of being showered with one honor after another. Cromwell is going to become the mightiest subject in the land, not only in civil matters, but also in religious matters, as Henry's vicar general. He's going to have a virtually unlimited amount of power, which of course is not going to sit well with all the enemies that he's made along the way. And the old families in England don't like the fact that he's a nobody, that he's from nowhere. A fact that Hilary Mantel really plays up in these novels, that he's from Putney, that he's a blacksmith's son who was beaten into the dirt, who ran away from home, made his fortune on the continent, used alternative names, may have killed someone, a shady past, the lowest possible kind of person. That's not going to sit well with the well-born families of the realm. They might ally themselves with Cromwell to get rid of Catherine of Aragon, to raise up Anne Boleyn. They might ally themselves with other people to bring down the Boleyns, who are almost as much of upstarts in their view as Cromwell is. But none of that is happening now. When this book starts, the first part of this book is called Falcons. You've got a falcon on the cover there, and that also alludes to the iconography of Anne Boleyn in connection with Henry. But when this book starts, Cromwell has virtually unlimited power, to the point where in a later section of this book, he can say to Anne Boleyn, who is Queen of England, "Please don't threaten me. It makes me uncomfortable." That's a lot of power. And it comes largely, as at this time, all power did, from proximity to the king. Cromwell is with Henry almost all the time. And this book opens with them making a summer progress through England. They are away from the stews of London for the summer. They have been for a long time. They've been hunting and hawking and carousing and hearing music and whatnot in various country houses and residences all throughout the kingdom. And Cromwell has been there with Henry the whole time, riding with him, joking with him. Henry has a large entourage. He has lots of other people, including well-born people. He also has professional courtiers who don't like Cromwell at all, and he knows they don't. But Hilary Mantel is really good in this section at giving us little private moments that, of course, we have no historical documentation of these moments, but they could have happened. And they are one of the pieces of magic that run throughout these books, is that these private moments feel so personal that suddenly these characters, who are figures from our history lessons, are living and breathing. I know of almost no writer that does this well. And there are bracketed moments that I want to read to you here, one with Henry and one with someone else at the end of this section. This is the one with Henry, where they have paused after a long day of riding out in the fields and lanes. Already you can feel the autumn. You know there will not be many more days like these. So let us stand, the houseboys of Wolf Hall swarming around us, Wiltshire and the western countries stretching into a haze of blue. Let us stand, the king's hand on his shoulder, Henry's face earnest as he talks his way back through the landscape of the day. The green copses and rushing streams, the alders by the water's edge, the early haze that lifted by 9, the brief shower, the small wind that died and settled, the stillness of the afternoon heat. Henry's hand is on Cromwell's shoulder while he walks his way through all of that. And you might have heard that phrase, you might have heard that mention of Wolf Hall. Because in this summer progress, this is one of the places that they end up. The country seat of the Seymour family. We get a wonderful little vignette of old John Seymour, the head of the family, who is known as a lecher who seduced one of his son's wives, son's first wife, until they put her away in a nunnery and she obligingly died. And the second wife of that son carries a bodkin in her sleeve in case he gets too close. And we have the Seymour family. We have Thomas and Edward, the two brothers, one cerebral and one hale and hearty. And we have one of the girls, Jane Seymour, little mousy, colorless Jane Seymour. Tiny little Jane Seymour, who Hilary Mantel, in a great turn of phrase, says that she had a habit of looking at men as though they were an unpleasant surprise. Henry is taken with her. Not with her sister, Bess, who is much more lively, but with Jane. In large part, we can't help but think because she is the exact opposite of the raging termagant that Anne Boleyn is becoming. Anne Boleyn is becoming shrill, unpleasant, angular, despite the fact that she's Queen of England and can produce children. I mean, Elizabeth is hale and healthy, so a girl, yes, but if she can do it once, the idea is still clinging in 1535 is that if she can do it once, she can do it again. A boy this time. Despite all of that, she is, as we're going to see later on, she's getting older, more angular, more shrill, harder on Henry. Exactly the sort of thing to make him like being around little Jane Seymour, mousy little Jane Seymour. And Cromwell is in Wolf Hall, the home of the Seymours. He's doing the endless amounts of state work that are his lot, paperwork all the time, constantly. And there's another little intimate scene where he's working at his desk when a movement catches his eye out the window. He looks out the window and sees Henry and Jane walking in one of the gardens of Wolf Hall. We get a description that emphasizes the difference in size between them. That Henry is a massive figure and Jane is like a little jointed puppet, her head not up to the king's shoulders. A broad man, a high man. Henry dominates any room. He would do it even if God had not given him the gift of kingship. When Henry comes in from that little meeting with Jane to Cromwell, he is stunned. He walks into the room. Cromwell is seated at a desk working on papers, getting dispatches from London about all sorts of latest news. Henry walks in and Cromwell starts to get up. Henry tells him, no, continue what you were doing, but he's barely paying any attention. He's just walking around the room, just the two of them in the room. You can easily picture it. You do a lot better job picturing it than you would seeing it in the adaptation of this that was put on the screen, virtually every detail of which was wrong. I have no idea what the producers of that show were thinking, casting Mark Rylance as Thomas Cromwell. Mark Rylance is one of the greatest actors alive today, but he should have refused the part. He's totally wrong for it. But anyway, Cromwell is trying to bring Henry back to himself, even mentioning, do you have a home remedy for this person who's ailing? Because he knows that Henry is a big fan of home remedies and fancies himself quite the apothecary. Henry's barely paying attention. Even then, he can barely bring himself to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, what were you saying?" And Cromwell recognizes the look. He recognizes the look on Henry's face as that of a veal calf of being stunned by a hammer, by the butcher's hammer. Henry doesn't seem like himself at all. And in the final scene of this section, we get another one of those intimate moments, those intimate, quiet moments like the first one with Henry's hand on Cromwell's shoulder. Again, the two scenes are very similar in that they have no dialogue. We're eavesdropping on these little moments, only this one involves Jane Seymour and shows us that she also is stunned. Something severe, something important is going on here. We don't know what they shared in that garden. Cromwell only watches them. He can't overhear them. But on their last morning at Wolf Hall, he steals downstairs. The whole house is still asleep. It's very early. The sun is barely set up. He is hoping to get a lot of work done before they get on the road. And he's about to enter a room when he sees a figure standing in the room looking out the window. And it's Jane Seymour, who doesn't see him. And we get this last glimpse in this chapter. Jane is facing front like a sentry. The clouds have blown away overnight. We may have one more fine day. The early sun touches the fields, rosy. Night vapors disperse. The forms of trees swim into particularity. The house is waking up. Unstalled horses tread and whinny. A back door slams. Footsteps creak above them. Jane hardly seems to breathe. No rise or fall discernible of that flat bosom. He feels he should walk backwards, withdraw, fade back into the night, and leave her here in the moment she occupies, looking out into England. So what passed between them? We don't know. There are two, those are great moments that bookend this little chapter, and there are two great scenes that occupy the bulk of it. One is a dinner scene in which Henry has sat down with the Seymours and Cromwell and all of his retainers, including a couple that really are rubbing Cromwell the wrong way and have no idea how high he's going to rise. They have no idea he's going to get even more powerful than he already is and might work their ruin. So there's lots of badinage back and forth at the table. Jane barely speaks at all. Henry can't take his eyes off her until, in a wonderful moment, he falls asleep in his chair. Not as young as he used to be. John Seymour says that. All tired out from the sun and the wind and the activity. He falls asleep in his chair. And suddenly everyone around the table is faced with the awkward reality of, well, what do we do? If we don't do anything, he might slip and fall to the floor or bang his head on the table. Someone has to do something. We have to wake him up. But how do you do that to a king as capricious and all-powerful as Henry? How do you do that? At one point, one of the Seymour brothers mimes gripping his ribs. In other words, suggesting the way we should wake him up is with laughter. We should just... Someone's told a funny joke at the table and we're all laughing. And the other Seymour brother, the smart one, says, oh yeah, you want to wake him up by giving him the idea that you were laughing at him. You go right ahead, but I'm not going to do it. People look at Cromwell. Surely you should be the one to do this. Right? But Cromwell will have absolutely nothing of it. In the Mantell-Cromwell books, Henry touches Cromwell quite a few times. Cromwell almost never touches Henry. And it has an arresting moment, actually, when he thinks Henry's dead and does touch him and notices how weird it is. Eventually, Jane Seymour gets up, walks to the head of the table, and taps Henry on the back of his hand, very, very matter-of-factly, like you would wake up a small child. And Henry does wake up immediately, protesting that he had not been asleep. Even that little moment is ruined in the TV production, the cable production of it, but it's there on the page, and it works perfectly well. And that's one of the two set-piece scenes in this little section. The other set-piece scene is an individual scene over a chessboard between Cromwell and the smart Seymour brother, Edward, who's wondering why Cromwell is being so frank with him. And they have an interesting discussion. There's also a wonderful moment. We don't see the chess game. It's not tediously described for us, thankfully, as so many less talented writers would do. But at one point, Cromwell says, are you sure you want to do that? I can see my way to your queen. Cromwell doesn't mean anything by it, but the reader can know immediately how ironic a line that is, considering that a future Queen of England was sitting at that dinner table. Cromwell also says, it would be a really good idea if we were to make alliances among the German princes to offset the emperor and to offset everyone. And again, Cromwell, of course, has no idea how ironic that comment is, but the reader does. The reader knows that it's pushing for an alliance like that's going to cost Cromwell everything down the line. Not in this book. But I can see my way to your queen is a wonderful little feint on Hilary Mantell's part. Shows that she is so sleeplessly awake, so sleeplessly aware of every nuance of these books. And they go on talking, and then at one point, Edward Seymour says just the word "oh." And that's when we know it's so wonderfully lightly done. He says, oh, and that's when we know that he has realized that he has lost this game and he must forfeit. Lovely, lovely stuff where they are at Wolf Hall. And this is not, whatever this is, it's not momentary. Something serious has passed between Henry and Jane Seymour. And that's where we leave things. That's where we leave this little bit of a chapter. The next one is much longer as we go back to London, which means going back to Anne Boleyn. But thanks to the artistry of Hilary Mantel, we also get the rest of our core cast of characters. Lots of other people, not only in Cromwell's household, but also that former queen. We get a mysterious, undocumented, on-the-fly visit from Cromwell to Queen Catherine. But that's the first part here, and that's where we are in this book. It's not hard to ground yourself here. You don't have to worry about coming into this if you haven't, for some odd reason, read Wolf Hall. You don't have to worry about starting with this book. It's all very well done. So confidently done that not only do you get tons and tons of exposition artfully woven in with that dinner scene and the conversation with Edward Seymour and a bunch of other things, but you also get those quiet personal moments, those totally unhurried moments that make you feel like you can breathe easy. This is not a history exam. So I thought I would just start this way because I need a break and I like to talk about Tudor fiction. Let me know if you want to go on with Bring Up the Bodies. I'd be happy to do that. But I'm going to wrap this up for now. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.